Hello, this is DC Hammer, and this is the DC Hammer Show. So as everyone knows, that last week President Trump gave a great State of the Union address, and you can see the crowd here. These are the members of the Senate and the House, and those in white are the ones that escaped from the asylum. They're the ones in the white coats that have the long sleeves that tie behind the back. One of the proposals being made by one of the erstwhile new members of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is dreaming of a train to everywhere. Park those planes, buddies. Sorry, pilots, you are out of work. We are now going to replace you with full-size bullet trains to everywhere, including under the ocean. And here is a scientific explanation of just exactly how that could happen. Several $trillion later, you could have these little tubes with these high-speed trains running through them. But as Chris Chappell with China Uncensored reports, and as I went through half of his broadcast about this topic yesterday, I'd now like to continue where we left off.
All that is behind us now. High-speed rail is back, baby. That's because China is considering building a high-speed rail line to the U.S. Mind blown. And I know it's true because I read it in the People's Daily. This rail line would start in northeast China, run through Siberia, cross a 125-mile underwater tunnel under the Bering Strait, then travel through Alaska and Canada before reaching the continental U.S.
Got it? So there it is. There is the first attempt to cross the ocean by train, engineered 5-6 years ago by the Communist Chinese. So the Red Dragon has led the way, been the pathfinder for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her contingent of climate crazies and transportation loons. Meanwhile, as brought to us by ChinaNews.net, Vice President Pence has called on the European allies to withdraw from the Iran nuclear undeal. So I'm sure you realize what the rub is here, that even though Vice President Mike Pence wants the European allies to withdraw from that deal, no deal, back in 2015, you know, the one that involved that $150 billion transaction, those C-130 aircraft loaded to the gills with your taxpayer dollars sent to Iran with absolutely nothing coming back our way except for the promise that Iran would use it in order to build their nuclear program, wipe out the little Satan, that's Israel, and then wipe out the big Satan, that's us, after it. But the elites would be in their bunker when that would all take place, and so they would come out then and save the remnant of the world, the 10% that they want left after they destroy 90% of us, in order to rule over the burning hulk, the steaming mess that they had created. But with that aside, going back to this issue, the problem is going to be, and I'm sure that Vice President Pence and President Trump realize this, is that the leaders of Iran have already threatened that since it looks like the United States is backing out of these treasonous relationships that were created by the former administration, that then the leaders of Iran are going to spill the beans on exactly all of those people that were involved in the bribery and corruption, the people in the leaders of the states in Europe and maybe even in the United States, who were given chunks of that $150 billion in order then to participate in this attempted destruction of the state of Israel and then further on the great state in the United States. So who knows how this will all play out, but one way or another it's now a lose-lose situation for the deep state and the tentacles that were wrapped around the government here in the United States for 8 years between 2009 and the beginning of 2016. There's a new sheriff in town and we'll see how this all goes. So over on this side of the big pond, there was a rally the other day in El Paso, Texas, with President Trump building support for the finishing of the wall and at the same time doing a rally in support of his 2020 presidential run. And thirdly, to show the world, to show the United States, the Marxist screaming media, the leftists and the Democrats side of the aisle, that the American people really want this to happen. So this article comes to us from Axios, and here are the interesting wrinkles on some of this. First of all, there was an estimated 70% of the people that registered for this rally were Hispanics. 2/3 of them had voted in 2 or fewer of the past 4 elections. I would think that 100% of them are going to vote in 2020, and I know exactly how they're going to vote. Sorry, well, you take your pick, whether it's going to be Pocahontas or one of her other fellow members of the Democrat tribe that will be the torch bearer for the Democrats in 2020? Buckle up. It's going to be difficult. So what does this mean? What it means is that President Trump is building a coalition that goes far beyond the traditional Republican base. And with those Democrats that had already walked away from the Democrat Party and are now Republicans, now they are running away from the screaming lunatics on the other side of the aisle. And it appears that President Trump's fight to secure the border and finish the wall has energized a significant number of Democrats to once again run away from the Democrat Party, which has let them down and led them down the wrong path for so many decades. And for those still non-believers that the border wall is important, this comes to us from One American News Network. Riots are breaking out on the southern side of the border near that Eagle Pass, Texas, that area near where President Trump appeared the other day in El Paso. And what's taking place now is, since they can't barrel their way across onto the American side, they're just going to go ahead and wreak havoc on the southern side of the border, the same kind of havoc that they would have wreaked if they were on this side of the border. So unfortunately, the Democrats are losing some of their base here as we are keeping them south of the border and not letting them vote illegally and then run from one state to another, committing crime after crime after crime. So I'm sure that gentleman at the front, he was just getting that must be a Democrat chair. It's a blue chair. He must have just been getting ready to sit at the front and talk quietly to, oh no, wait a minute. They're trying to bash people on the head with these chairs? That can't be. These are the people that the Democrats want you to let into this country. Welcome aboard, boys. And if you think that this is an isolated incident, no, this is the second riot to break out at the facility just this week, and they're upset about the policies. Imagine how they would have been upset by the laws of the United States when they got it, but that's okay. They could go to sanctuary states like California where they don't have to abide by any of the laws. Citizens in California have to provide their own legal driver's licenses, insurance, and registrations for vehicles when they drive, but illegal aliens are exempt for any of that. So they can ram into other drivers on the road, and when the police then ask them for identification, they can say, I don't have it. They are then not asked further details. They don't have to show a valid driver's license. They don't have to show proof of insurance. They don't have to even prove that their car is insured, or registered rather. All they have to do is just make it obvious to the policia that they are from out of the country, but they're here for good things, for economic well-being and so on, and the police just salute them and let them go on their way as the citizen sits there and files the report with their insurance company. But as the Epoch Times tells us, that maybe even if the full funding for the border wall is not secured by President Trump, cross your fingers, pray, and hope it takes place. Today is February 14, the day before the shutdown, the looming shutdown on the 15th. If deals are not struck and the budget is not cracked, and we can either go back to continuing resolutions or have no budget at all and a shutdown. But on our side of the border, the Customs and Border Protection officers are erecting barriers, even though they're not permanent, but at least something, and amassing along our side of the border in order to protect American citizens, even though the Democrats would prefer that that doesn't take place, from the possible onslaught of the invasion army coming their way. So once again, this is in that Piedras Negras, which means Black Rocks area, that's near Eagle Pass, Texas. And so that small town is getting ready for the invasion army headed their way, using military and border patrol assets in order to protect American citizens and their property. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, the Mexican police and military personnel guarding the outside of an old factory where 1,800 illegal aliens are being held, again in that Piedras Negras, Mexico, that couple days ago. The majority of them hoping to get in the United States and claim asylum, and according to statistics taken for the people that intend to get on this side, well north of 90% of these people have absolutely no claim to asylum, as they are either being human trafficked or are human traffickers, or in the drug trade, are terrorists brought in from the Middle East, and so on. 90+% of these people have no chance of getting asylum anyway, because they're, number one, not eligible, and if we let them in, all we'd be doing is, within a few days, they'd probably be in our jails for committing crimes on our side of the border. And so the Border Patrol and other law enforcement agents are using their vehicles to make it obvious to the people, the members of the Soros invasion army and other invasion armies coming our way, that they mean business, lining up their vehicles and headlights in the face. I don't know if that'll deter any of these invaders from the south, but it at least shows them that we're pointed in the right direction. And the conservative treehouse sheds a little light on the pending border wall solution. I was fooled the other day into thinking that reports I saw indicated that there may actually be something in that budget resolution and the negotiated budget deal that was coming from the rhinos and nefarious Democrats that the Senate and House Joint Committee have been supposedly meeting together to resolve the differences for this last 10 days. But it turns out that all they were doing is, as was suspected by President Trump, laying landmines, tripwires, doing whatever they can to try to get President Trump to sign off on a piece of legislation that would actually have embedded within it methods of preventing the border wall from being built, even though it supposedly forked up $1.37 billion for that purpose. There's language that's been inserted by the demonic Democrats that would allow the municipalities and states, as can you say California, the sanctuary state, from vetoing the ability of the federal government to try to erect that border wall on the borders between their states/cities and Mexico. So, I don't think that President Trump will fall for this. I think he'll find other ways to get around it, and this may spell the doom of that proposed budget deal. It looks like it's going to be no deal if they continue to try to push through Trojan horses such as this. And don't forget, as Q-Team has brought to our attention on previous broadcasts, if you take a look at the two maps here, it shows on the left where illegal aliens are hanging out in the United States. The dark blue areas, those are the clusters of these illegals. And then on the right-hand side is the map that shows the voting pattern within the United States. And all of the red on that map on the right, the vast majority of territory is Republican-leaning. The darker the red, the more towards the Republican Party they vote. And the blue and the darker blue meaning the remnants of the dying Democrat Party. But as you can see, the overlap of one map upon the other would show you just exactly how it is. The illegal immigrants tend to cluster exactly where quote-unquote Democrats vote. Could it be this is where the illegal aliens are voting in mass? We know they're voting all over the country, but it appears that if you look at that right map and then look at the left map and put one over the other, visually just imagining it with your eyes, you can see the tendency for some of the darker blue areas to fit perfectly with where the illegal aliens are gravitating. And anyone that believes that the people in those areas are not voting illegally, I think you're dreaming, but that dream is about to be shattered. So let's say that the border wall is not funded by whatever takes place within the next day or two. Well, erstwhile Texas Senator Ted Cruz has come up with a brilliant method in order to pay for the wall. And this fits in with President Trump saying from the campaign on that not only was the wall going to be built and finished, but also it was going to be in Mexico that would pay for it. So El Chapo, the drug lord that took over after Pablo Escobar was taken out, he has been running that same cartel all these years. He was arrested. He was taken to jail to begin with. He was tried in court. He's found guilty on 10 counts. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life, and they are seizing billions of dollars worth of his assets. And now Senator Ted Cruz has suggested that we take those El Chapo billions and use that to pay for the wall, and he's actually introducing legislation in order to make that happen. God bless you, Ted Cruz. Then this comes to us from Grabby News. So if you haven't heard, Andrew McCabe has come out with a book, and that book clearly indicates that McCabe's treachery and those around him, their treachery, goes far beyond anything you could have imagined. So we don't really need to be conducting all these investigations in order to find out what's going on. All we have to do is give book deals to people like McCabe and Comey and everyone else so they can admit. In Comey's case, he admitted to all the leaking he was doing, which is illegal. And McCabe, in his book, admitting to a lot of the illegal activity that he has been involved in, and only, people in the alternative media speculating on how deep that nefarious activity had gone, and now he admits it himself. So I'm glad that he's going to make a few bucks off that book deal, but who knows, maybe Representative Nunes will have some additional reasons to send some recommendations for legal action to the Department of Justice, and when William Barr begins his tenure as a new U.S. Attorney General, it looks like he'll have plenty to mull over. The first thing he should probably do is read McCabe's book. And at the same time, outgoing, disgraced former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is denying what McCabe is now saying. So you've got the rats leaving the ship, but at the same time, the rats are duking it out with each other. And so you've got Rat 1, Rosenstein, and Rat 2, or whatever order you want to put them in, McCabe now, providing information that shows that they can't both be right here. One or the other is lying, and I thought lying was supposed to be a really bad thing, right, Bob Mueller? Well, we're going to find out soon, and now the black hats are eating each other. And as True Pundits is reporting, as I just said a minute ago, Representative Devin Nunes is indicating that many people will be criminally referred to the DOJ after William Barr is confirmed, naturally. Can't do it right now. The reign of Rosie Rosenstein is going to last for a couple more days, but as soon as he is gone, then Devin Nunes, who's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, is going to start those referrals, bound to be an extremely busy Attorney General once William Barr takes over. And is it possible that the types of referrals that are headed over the DOJ will go beyond the surface level issues as far as that failed coup d'etat against President Trump, and maybe it even goes on to other illegal activity, as the Geller report by Pamela Geller illuminates? Nancy Pelosi, leader of the House of Representatives, or at least temporarily, Nancy the Gavel Pelosi, earned a fortune. Initial public offerings that corporations that are forming and going public issue, and through illegal insider trading, she has apparently amassed a small or maybe even large fortune. As this unfolds and as we learn more about what dear Nancy has been up to, maybe it'll be a truly significant number. And so now, as the Geller report indicates, the new Nazi party, the party of treason, the party of the deep state, the party of unrestrained corruption, that would be the Democrats, spinning their endless fantasies about collusion between Trump and Russia. And now we know that the actual collusion was between Clinton and Russia. And on the other side of the coin, not only do you have the activity, the treasonous, seditious activity between members of the former administration and foreign countries, but you also then have the fortune hunters like Pelosi, Dinosaur Diane Feinstein, and others, Mad Maxine Waters, getting rich over the supposed stupidity of the Americans. But as we've now been awakened, and as the search for true justice, for equality under the law will be restored, maybe this is all going to fall apart. So as the Geller report indicates, there's enough illegal activity involved here on the part of Nancy Pelosi that she could be looking at some serious prison time. So my advice, Nancy the Gavel Pelosi, is get some good legal help. I know that Larry Klayman will not be willing to defend you, but I'm sure you can find some former Clinton Foundation, maybe Maybe Jeannie Rhee, she's going to have nothing to do in a few days. Maybe she will be available and she can help you defend yourself against this. So Nancy may be worth anywhere between 16 million and 100 million, and apparently a ton of that was obtained through illegal means. So let's see. The Democrats have brought this on. They want action taken against people they disagree with on the right side of the aisle, even for things they didn't do, like Michael Flynn. So maybe there'll be serious consequences on the left side of the aisle for the people that actually did participate in significant law breaking. And speaking of significant law breaking, this comes to us from the Washington Examiner, and if you don't think it could get any worse for Michael Avenatti. You remember Michael Avenatti, who came to prominence during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings that brought forth these fake claims of sexual abuse by Brett Kavanaugh when he was in high school? The propped up, created out of thin air allegations, but then his house of cards started to fall apart, and he started having issues with his landlord and got thrown out on the street. Former employees of his law firm coming after him to collect from him, and now it appears that Michael Avenatti has even, now don't forget, he also then was going to be the Democrat 2020 nominee for president of the United States, and now he's actually been thrown out of his own law firm. Hard to feel sorry for Michael Avenatti, but we're all created in God's image, and so I would pray that he would repent, he would change his ways, he would accept Jesus and get back on the right track, because even if Jeffrey Dahmer could do that, perhaps even Michael Avenatti could get back on the right track. And all the brouhaha about this insane position that the Democrats in different states like New York and Virginia are taking on abortion, or should I say infanticide, terminating the life, murdering babies after they're born. And it turns out now, per the Washington Free Beacon, that 70% of voters, and that would be voters as in both Republicans and Democrats, back legislation to protect babies, and in essence disagree then wholeheartedly with the stance of all Democrats in New York and Democrats in Virginia, who are hustling around to save their butts from getting thrown out of office. And don't you think that this will be a major campaign platform for 2020? I don't see how they're going to avoid the flack from this one. And talking about flack, remember the red face of Bernie Socialist Sanders as he was sitting in the House of Representatives side of the House chamber during the State of the Union address, and how morbid he became, red-faced and somber, when President Trump announced to the audience that the United States will never become a socialist country. And now it turns out that even within Bernie Sanders' former base, those ignorant dingbats that were actually promoting him for president back in the 2016 presidential cycle, apparently that things such as Medicare for all is now imploding, and voters, again, on both sides of the aisles, now that they understand the implications of the fact that Medicare for all is, number one, not doable, number two, would more than double the debt that we already have that's already unsustainable. Thank you, Barack Hussein Obama, who brought us more debt in his tenure than the previous 43 presidents combined before him, going from $9 to $10 trillion in debt when Obama took office to $20 trillion when he left office. But now apparently the public is waking up in support for the possibility of quote-unquote Medicare for all. It would be no health care for anybody. Wait in the line. You'll probably die before you see a doctor. This is all imploding as the facts are coming out that there's no way on the planet that this kind of a program could actually work. And half of the support for this Medicare for all proposal is taking place, and now it's down to just 12 points on an approval poll as far as the number of people that would actually vote for someone that would be a proponent of this kind of insane legislation. And while we're talking about insane legislation, let's move on to the Daily Signal. And the headline on this one is, "We Don't Need a Sweeping Overhaul of Gun Laws." And as you know, the anniversary of the shooting in Parkland, Florida, which has now resulted in the firing of Broward County Sheriff Israel. He was relieved of his command the other day by the Republican governor of Florida due to lies that he had told during the Parkland shooting investigation. And so Broward County now is being brought into the fold with Brenda Sykes, the election commissioner, now out on her keister, followed by Sheriff Israel. He is now gone. The supporters of people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz now out of office. So the shoes are continuing to drop in that county, and maybe one of those legal referrals that Nunes will be pushing over to the new Department of Justice, maybe it'll have Debbie Wasserman Schultz's name on it, and will continue to clean the house down there in Florida. So as the Democrats continue to try to gut the Second Amendment and take guns away from lawful citizens, to ensure that criminals invade through the southern border and that our citizens don't have what they need to protect themselves, they refuse to help harden the schools to enable ex-military veterans to be hired and armed and put in the schools, or even school teachers and administrators to be licensed and armed to help guard the schools. They'd prefer to go on down this fool's path in order to take the guns away from the innocent and the people that are protecting themselves, and to leave the country in a state so that all the illegal alien criminals have guns, because they're not going to give them up no matter what you do legislatively. But at the same time, all the law-abiding citizens have their guns taken away from them. Well, it appears that this is also another piece of leftist legislation that is gaining broad disapproval from the American public, whom are now viewing it as a dangerous and ill-conceived plot in order to destabilize the country and to create the very chaos that they say that this would eliminate. And yes, as I mentioned, WorldNet Daily goes into better detail on the fact that there's a movement that's growing. If schools were to hire combat veterans to stop attackers, they're not going to negotiate. They're going to put the attackers down. This comes from Palmetto, Florida, and a charter school there has hired 2 combat veterans to patrol the grounds with semi-automatic rifles to protect the students. So thank you, Principal Jones, and I would think other school districts will be following this model. And as we're continuing to rack up the left-wing failures for the day, this comes from the New American. A court has given President Trump and his EPA a victory, that'd be Scotty Pruitt, the director of the EPA, a victory over, oh gee whiz, who would thunk this, a Soros-funded group that was attempting to take action in order to fund scientists through money from the EPA to holding advisory positions in that same agency. So they were attempting, the Soros group was attempting to take money that goes from the taxpayer to the government treasury to departments like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and for that money then to be used in order to hire the same kind of people that are working against the country and trying to create things like the Paris Climate Accord and such, for those people to be hired and paid then to be in an advisory capacity for that same agency. Sorry, Georgie, it just didn't work. Not going to happen. And taking that to the next stage, not only are the EPA regulations going to be enforced in a way that truly balances the need to protect the environment and to business owners and the public, this comes to us from Zero Hedge, and Martin Armstrong has slammed Algore's deliberate global warming fraud that was perpetrated into increase governmental power. And so just how did Algore attempt to inflame the public by being the breathing dragon of quote-unquote global warming, as he attempted to scare everybody into forking up hundreds of millions of dollars to his windmill tilting campaign? Well, if you go back in time to the 70s, in 1977, the fear at that time was that the planet was in a period of global cooling, and that scientific evidence was indicating that the Earth was going to be affected by climate change. You don't think that climate change is just something they made up today. So over 40 years ago, the scientists were all grouping together to rail against the effects of climate change in the negative way, in other words, a temperature decline. And now we've gone through this period of global warming that they are now attributing on man-made impact rather than the truth. And the truth of it is that there's this large yellow thing in the sky. It's called the sun. God put it there to warm this planet. And the sun goes through cycles. And the sun was going through a grand solar minimum back in the 70s. And that's when this picture of Time magazine was taken. And then it went towards a grand solar maximum that maxed up a few years ago in, say, 2015-16. And now that that's peaked, we are headed down the slope again into another period of grand solar minimum. And as the polar bears are fat, dumb, and happy, and as the ice is continuing to grow, and portions of the country, whether it be the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest, are suffering through record snowfalls, ice storms, and a variety of conditions that are, again, not man-made, but are nature-made, and God is doing his thing, and weather continues to change, and climate continues to change. And yes, in a small way, man-made activity can have an impact on some of these things, but as Professor Judith Curry, formerly of Georgia Tech, before she was forced out of that university by the climate change fanatics, was saying that 90+% of what takes place on this planet has absolutely nothing to do with anything man is causing. And so we continue to fight the effects of the red dragon and the fire-breathing Algore dragon, but the planet is in good hands right now, will be for at least the next couple years, and God willing, with President Trump and a red tsunami bringing back a House of Representatives that has some sense, that will be elected in 2020 and take over in 2021, we can reverse the effects of all of this hot air that's been coming our way. And so I say, Trump 2020, and thank you for watching. God bless. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as an audio podcast. Just go to Podcast Garden or iTunes and search for DC Hammer or News Network Analysis Associates, NNAA.